Oh, hey, everybody. Welcome to the official Do Good Better podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Kirby. And of course, this podcast is dedicated for all of the small and medium-sized nonprofits doing wonderfully great big things. But sometimes you need to talk to big name personalities and amazing individuals who have made a career in doing awesome things, not only nationally, but globally. Today's one of those days. I would like to welcome our guest today, Kris Putnam-Walkerly. She is a 20-year philanthropic, ultra awesome fundraising consultant and fundraiser in general. You've probably seen her if you've been paying attention in the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, Entrepreneur, NPR, Forbes. We've all heard of those things, right? She is amazing, and it has said, yeah, I think we want to talk today. And I'm super blessed to have you. Kris, how are you? Welcome to the official Do Good Better podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
I'm excited. All right. So for those who are kind of flipping through YouTube and they're looking through all of their podcast channels and they say, I like the sound of this. How did you get started and what's kind of your background and how did you get to where you are today, fundraising wise, here in the nonprofit world?
Yes, so I've been advising as a philanthropy advisor for the past 20 years. And, my foray started with political organizing. My first job out of college was working for a nonprofit organization in the San Francisco area, trying to stop U.S. military involvement in Central America. Somehow I ended up getting a master's in social work. And then shortly thereafter, I went to work at Stanford University, where I was evaluating youth and gang violence prevention programs. That was funded by a major statewide foundation, the California Wellness Foundation. And what I learned, really, what intrigued me about philanthropy was that if you, as a funder, if nothing else, you have a lot of money, right? But if you also have smarts, if you bring in the right people, look at top research, bring in the right experts, and really figure out what are the ways we can get to the root cause and solve some of these problems, you can create a lot of positive change. And they, at the time, were really focused on switching the notion of youth violence from a juvenile justice problem to a public health problem. And they were at the forefront. And I really appreciated that. So I thought, well, maybe I should continue working on in philanthropy. So I went to work at the David and Lucille Packard Foundation. And that was, at the time, this was the late 90s, way back in the day, I believe the largest foundation in the country, if not the world. And so that was a fascinating experience also to really understand strategic philanthropy. And then I was, basically in Silicon Valley during the dot-com boom. The biggest, challenge facing philanthropy at the time was our assets are growing so quickly. How can we possibly give our money away this year? So they hired lots of consultants. So it was fairly easy to get going. I did a lot of consulting with Charles and Helen Schwab's foundation and many other family foundations, health conversion, private, corporate. And that's kind of where I got started.
And I think that's the best part about this for the audience who's the small and medium-sized nonprofits who are saying, I can never get the advice of someone who's worked in sort of these big things. That's the beauty of this podcast is we're bringing on folks like you, Kris, to help us understand that and really take some of the tips and tricks that you've learned in some of the biggest nonprofit organizations and the biggest foundations and how we can apply it to your day-to-day life. So this world is now bizarre, and it's a world that we 5 months ago had way greater plans, and now all of those are not a thing anymore. What are you seeing in your clients and in your realm that is the most jarring or the most interesting since we have entered this sort of global pandemic in general?
Yeah. So I see three things. One is both among nonprofits and many foundations, there are a lot of both types of organizations that have basically gone into hiding.
Yeah.
So they are either out of fear or feeling overwhelmed or sort of deer in the headlights and not quite sure what to do or how to respond. They're nowhere to be found, right? They're under the covers, they're in the fetal position. They are just not responding. And I think, a lot of nonprofits are fearful that, they're not quite sure how to communicate with their donors, if they're bothering their donors, are they not the right organization to be seeking funds at this time because they're not, on the quote unquote front lines. And a lot of them, quite frankly, didn't have their house in order going into this crisis. And so are scrambling to do things like apply for some of this federal loans. Mm-hmm. And the problem is they're going to lose out on the opportunity to get a lot of this funding, the payroll protection and other federal loans. And so, that's a problem. And for foundations, or philanthropists in general, they have, it's a privileged position. These are people who have so much money, they have extra money to give it away to other people, right? Right. And even if they're losing some of it in the stock market, it's still, so hiding is a little bit easier. But, there's a lot of opportunities and ways that funders can be giving back that they're not taking advantage of. So that's one thing that I'm seeing. I think the other thing I'm seeing on the entirely flip side is a lot of both philanthropists and nonprofits that are innovating and shedding previously held restrictions and kind of policies and procedures and fears and dramatically changing, adapting, and innovating their work. And so, for example, on the philanthropic side, the grant giver side, a lot of foundations, had previously never been willing to provide core operating support, general support to nonprofits, and now are switching their existing grants to become, from program and project specific grants with all these restrictions, they're unrestricting those grants and making them core operating support. They are saying to their grantees, never mind the deadlines, just, we'll get back to you later this year. And by the way, don't worry about the report. We'll write it for you. We'll just call you. Don't worry about applications, here's money. Mm-hmm. And, and even better with all of it, a message of we trust you, nonprofit leaders. We believe that you will actually use this money as you best see fit. Mm-hmm. And we'll just wait to hear how that goes. Which is great. It's really amazing. And it's funny to me because, there's been a lot of people advocating for these kinds of changes in the philanthropic sector for a long time. Mm-hmm. And there's been many funders that have been willing to act this way, but there's a whole lot more that are making these changes. And similarly on the nonprofit side, nonprofits that are willing to try new things like switch in-person events to virtual events, practically overnight, which takes tremendous courage. Yes. And are willing to adapt, their services and, offer new things or offer it in different ways to people, even sometimes at no, without being able to generate any revenue, the ballet companies and the arts organizations that are offering free art online, which is really smart because it's keeping their membership engaged and potentially reaching different audiences mm-hmm. who will be there, I believe, when we return. Well, there is no new normal, but when things calm down, I guess I'll say. Yeah. And then the third is really the important need to shift strategy at this time. And we are living in a different world than literally everyone in the world is living in a different world than we were 5 months ago. So if you had a strategic plan, even if it was brand spanking new, 5 months ago in January or last year, now is the time to pull it out and reflect on what needs to change, because it's, I think, darn near impossible for it to be completely intact and relevant today. Some things need to adapt. Some things might stay the same. Some things might need to be abandoned, and some things, radically overhauled. Mm-hmm. And this can be done quickly and remotely. And it really should be done soon, because strategy, in my mind, provides the right framework for making decisions and allowing you to know what's most important to work on right now. Mm-hmm.
For those in your first point, which is organizations going into hiding, is it too late, or is there if you pivot now and you make a turn and you make a conscious effort to say, no, we're done now, we've taken our lumps, we understand that we probably shouldn't have stopped communication altogether, and that we should have had this abundance mindset, that there is money and value and people who want to help, Is there time to make a turn now? And what do they do as a first step to begin that process to kind of creep out of the cave and say, is everything still here? And what's that first move for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. And absolutely, there is no time like the present. And, I think, this crisis, it will continue. It'll ebb and flow. It'll evolve. But, I think we need to think about being in here for the long haul. And things are certainly going to be very different. And they're going to continue to change. And so I think as nonprofit organizations, we need to think about how do we continuously adapt and also increase our agility so that we're not just adapting, which means responding to change that's, happening to you, like a pandemic or a recession. But how do nonprofits proactively look out ahead, if it's ahead next week or, next year or whatnot, and look at what are some of the changes in the marketplace and the environment, positive or negative, and how do we turn those to our advantage? How do we identify innovations with that? And how do we, navigate around some of the challenges? And so I think specifically, steps to take would be, one is really to refresh your strategy or create one. And I mean, when I say quickly, I mean like by next week. I don't mean at all what we typically think of these elongated strategic planning processes that take 6 months or a year, and there's all this research. I mean, figuring out, okay, where do we want to be as an organization by December? Like not even a full year, like at the end of the year, right? Who do we want to be? What kind of impact do we want to be having? Where are we today? Like today, Friday, or today, whatever day you're thinking about it. And how do we get specifically from where we are today to where we want to be? And what are the, 3 to 4 kind of most critical strategic factors that are going to get us there? If it's, we're going to need, we had to furlough our entire team. So in order to get there, we're going to have to rehire. And who do we need to rehire? Like, is it the same people or is it a different skill set? Or it could be brand recognition, or it could be communications. It could be finances. What are the 3 to 4 most important things you need to focus on? And then putting people accountable for them and kind of quickly figuring out, just very simply, like, okay, finances, ours are in disarray. So what are the 5 activities we have to do next in order to figure this out? Like, A, call our board chair who, for advice on who to talk to. B, find an expert to advise us. C, like find a better bookkeeper, whatever it is, right? Take a training and kind of move your way forward so that you can understand, okay, this is our financial situation and we can make decisions from it, or these are the kind of board members we need to have on, or this is how we need to engage our current board, whatever it might be. But, think of strategy really as your best thinking of the moment. And you can adjust this as you go. So get things moving, make progress, and then in June or, within a few months or in a quarter, check in, where are we, adjust, and keep moving. I think that's big. And then the second thing is really communication with funders and donors. And, I think there's all this technology that we're using and learning, but I think the most important piece of technology we have is the telephone or the smartphone or whatever it is, right? Like,
they're sitting in our pockets. Phone. Yeah, they're sitting in our pockets.
Right, they're sitting in your pocket. Like, pick up the phone and call people.
It's built for that.
They'll be delighted to hear from you because no one else is calling them.
And they're all at home. That's what I've been talking about this. They're sitting at home. They're bored out of their skulls. They can't go anywhere. They want to talk about something other than a global pandemic. They want to know what you're doing. And one of the things that I think you touched on is just the speed by which you need to do something, and don't wait for it to be perfect. I think a lot of the frozen in place organizations are so concerned that they will say something wrong or say something that's not exactly the way that they had planned it for the last 14 years or 2 years or whatever it is. And they're worried that they're going to say something that's out of line. And I think that this pandemic has given everybody is going to give everybody grace to make a couple of errors if they're moving the needle forward and they're doing it for their mission and they're going to follow their true north of what they're doing as their organization. If you're just moving, for the love of God, just move. And then that will then, like you said, give you a path to realign every 2 days of say where we are, where we're going, and how we're doing it. Do not let perfection get in the way of progress. Dang it.
Hallelujah. I hear you. No, I totally agree. And I think, to your point, obviously many people right now feel very overwhelmed,
yes.
right? And you sit down at your desk or your laptop or your, kitchen table or whatever you're doing, and you're like deer in the headlights of like your day, like, oh my God, I have like 16,000 things to do. What do I do? And, to me, that's why having a strategy is helpful, because with that comes prioritization. So you know what you're doing, and then the 3 to 4 like most important things you need to focus on. So if it's, get your finances in order and begin communicating with your donors, like that's your marching orders, like that's it. Mm-hmm. So that's how you should be spending your day. And so to me, while it does require a little bit of work up front, it unleashes clarity and the ability to prioritize, not just for your organization, but for everyone on the team, because everyone will have a role to play. Mm-hmm. But even let's just say, you can't fathom coming up with your strategy right now. At least you can think about, well, what are the 2 to 3 to 4 things that are most important for this organization or nonprofit to do in the next 2 months, right? Yeah. Get to agreement on that. And then just focus on those things. And like pick one. It really doesn't matter. Just pick one and move.
Yeah. I think that's such an excellent segue into the next point that you brought up with people and organizations and even foundations, private foundations, adjusting strategy on the fly and kind of sloughing off the way that things have always done as a action step recently. I think, and I've been saying this, or the realization I've been saying this is, there's not a better group of individuals than those who work in the nonprofit world to adjust to a global pandemic, because we've been doing this our entire lives. You have a board member that says, hey, we need to do a gala and raise $100,000. Do it by next week. Or we need to ask this person who we have zero relationship with for a major gift because our finances are in chaos and we need to do it. This is what we've been doing forever. And so if there's a group of individuals, nonprofit world is built for taking this head on and swiftly changing. But what you said was interesting, because I think this is what I've realized is the private foundations and the donor advised funds who sit on a mountain of wealth. And I'm glad that you're seeing that they're kind of shedding off their old ways. And so 2 questions. One, if you're a small and medium-sized nonprofit and you live in a community in which those private foundations have not aggressively unleashed their funding that's available, how do you have that conversation? And number 2 that we can talk about is when this calms down, how do we prevent them from going back to their old ways? Because I think once it happens, the floodgates are done and you're not going to be able to put the lid back on the bottle here of you did it once, you can continue doing this and everything was okay. But I think there's going to be this natural instinct to contract once this thing has slowed down. How do we, as nonprofit leaders in the community, say, no, you don't get to do that anymore. We know that we can work together. This is way more fun. So let's start there. So how do we have that conversation, and then how do we continue this?
Yeah, that's great. So how do you have that conversation? First is, I think you need to adjust your mindset as a nonprofit leader.
Yeah.
And the mindset really needs to be, you are a peer and you are a partner. And you're not asking for something, you're offering value to your donors.
Yes, yes.
And I write about this as I'm not sure if we mentioned this at the beginning, but I do have a new book out called Delusional Altruism.
Yes, we're still going to get to
And
that. I'm
one
so
of the things I
excited.
write about in this book is having a scarcity mindset and then also an abundance mindset. And I think in this instance, the abundance mindset, the scarcity mindset is we're bothering you, we have our hand out, oh dear funder, could you please give us some money? But maybe we're not worthy. There's more important causes happening in the world right now, so we'll just wait. An abundance mindset is, hey funder, like you're not the one delivering on your mission, like we're the one delivering on your mission, right? Like the donors, generally speaking, are not the ones providing, homeless services, building low-income housing, teaching early childhood education, right? They're funding it, which is great. But you need to recognize that you as the nonprofit, like you're the one enabling the foundation or the funder to meet their mission. So you have a valuable role to play. And, if your cause was important last year, I can guarantee you it's important today, right? It's just it may be important differently, or there's a different nuance to it, but it's still important today. And so, you're providing an opportunity for your donors to help, to contribute, to meet their mission, quite frankly, to feel good about themselves. In some cases it's an ego, but genuinely speaking, these are individuals who really want to do the right thing and make a difference, but they can't do that if they don't know you and they don't know what you're doing, how you're responding, or how whatever your issue is being impacted, and what solutions you have to address them. And so I think it's a mindset start first and foremost. And then with that mindset is, reaching out to funders and donors. And I think first it's, asking them how they're doing, if it's somebody that you have a relationship with, checking in on them, and, letting them know that you've been thinking about them, you want to know how they are, and then listening. And that's because it's a relationship. And, going back to a different kind of crisis, back about 11 years ago when I can't remember how many billions of dollars were lost in the Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of donors that lost, they lost a lot of money, a lot of their wealth. And suddenly, to their embarrassment, like they couldn't afford to go to your gala. They couldn't afford to give money. And a lot of their identity was tied up in, being part of these nonprofits and being longstanding donors and board members who contributed and buying tables and whatnot. And, there's nonprofits that saw those donors as like, well, I guess they can't give us any money this year. We're just going to stop talking to them, or we feel bad, or we don't want to have an awkward conversation. So we'll just ignore them. And then there were nonprofits that reached out to those donors and said, hey, hope you're okay. We're thinking about you. And, the gala wouldn't be the same without you. Can you please come as our guest? Right. And those donors have a lot of loyalty to those nonprofits that were there for them in times that were really difficult in their lives. And so I think, again, sort of seeing your donors as other human beings, and being there for them. And then, then letting them know what you're working on, how this is impacting you, the challenges you've had, the ways you've pivoted and adapted, and the opportunities you see going forward, and the ways that their money could be helpful to you. I mean, you're not going to walk away from that conversation with less money than you walked into it with, right? Like there's no downside.
No.
And so I think, it's important to have those conversations.
And I think that's really one of the things that, and I love that point, which is you're all on the same team. They want to see you succeed. They've been there through the tough times and the bad times and whatever. I want them to do great things. So I think that's really kind of a fun thing. I really like that. Pivoting forward, how do we let them know, or foundations know, how to not have this stop?
How to not have this stop? Is that what you said?
Yeah. How do we not go back to the way things were?
Yeah. So as I was saying earlier, right. So again, I think it's really amazing, all these kind of new best practices that many foundations and
corporate giving programs are adopting, unrestricting grants, getting the money out the door much faster, eliminating the need for like 6 people to sign and approve a check, or even have, a lot of my clients, foundation clients, entered this crisis unable to issue grants without physically writing checks. And the checks were in the office and they were on stay-at-home orders and couldn't get to the office. It's silly, but true. But anyway, so a tremendous amount of funders are changing how they're giving. And, my hope is that those practices stick. My concern is that there's like some future date in the world, like let's just say, I don't know, October 15th. And all of a sudden, all of those best practices are going to get like collectively sucked back into, foundation boardrooms. And we'll hear this like loud whooshing sound as all of those practices come back and like get locked down and never to be seen again. So I'm trying to prevent that from happening. But I think communication is actually the way to do it. And so I think, for the funders that are saying to nonprofit leaders, here's a core operating support grant. We completely trust that you'll do the right thing and we'll get back to you, get back to us later this year. Like, that's awesome. And if I were the nonprofit leader, I would get back to the donor regularly to update them on progress so that you can just kind of reassure them the money is being well spent. Here's what we're doing. Here's what we're seeing. And I mean like an email or a phone call. I don't mean like a report, and just why not keep your donors appraised of what's happening and how the money is being put to good use, sharing some stories, because that's going to feed, their belief that they did the right thing, and they can share those stories with their boards and whatnot. I think that is a tremendously helpful way to go about doing that. And then, I think at the end, demonstrating how the monies were actually spent, even if it was for general operating support, and all you did, quote unquote, all you did was fund, the executive director and the development director during that time. Well, that's great, because A, you're still in existence, in the recovery period, and B, you've raised money or you've built more relationships or whatever you've accomplished, even if your services had to go on hold. So I think, I think those, it's really all about communication.
We can't end this conversation without talking about, you have a brand new book. It is out. Is it coming out? It's coming. It's out. You can get this right now. Delusional Altruism.
It's out.
Yes.
It's out.
Let's go get it. Let's
Yes.
talk about Delusional Altruism. What is this book about? And give us kind of a synopsis on why you wrote it and why it's needed right now.
Yeah. So yes, Delusional Altruism. It's available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and Books A Million. And I even saw it at Target online recently. But I wrote the book, it just published in March, and I wrote it because after 20 years of advising philanthropists of all kinds, corporate giving programs, ultra high net worth donors, everyday givers, foundation leaders, I recognize that, these are people who genuinely want to make a difference. They really want to change the world in meaningful ways, but they are getting in their own way. They're preventing themselves from having the impact that they seek. They are holding on to sort of these illogical thoughts and ideas, and it's tripping them up. And often they don't even realize it. And so I wrote the book to help funders recognize how this happens and why it happens, and then what they can do differently and how they can have more of a transformational impact on whatever issue or cause or community they care about. And to do that by transforming themselves and transforming how they give. Mm-hmm.
Is there one general message that you, while writing the book, just said, this is gonna be so great if a nonprofit organization picks up this book and reads it?
Yeah, I think for a nonprofit to pick up the book and read it, the value is really understanding your donors and understanding what's holding them back, what's preventing them from having the impact with your organization that you want. I think it's really kind of a really good insider's guide for nonprofit leaders to understand kind of what's happening in philanthropy and why things are the way they are. So, I talk about in the book, talk about fear and overwhelm that we're feeling now. I have an entire chapter about fear and an entire chapter about overwhelm and how those two things hold back funders. Like, you wouldn't think that a philanthropist would be fearful, but I'm here to tell you, even in the best of times, they're very fearful. And one of the ways nonprofits experience that is donors often fear losing control. They want to tightly control their money, right? And so that's why all these restrictions are put on you as the nonprofit. That's why they're asking for all this detail and like metrics and detailed reports. And it's really fundamentally based on fear of losing control. And I think understanding that, I think, is really helpful. It's also, philanthropy is a field that typically is very slow. I actually use an analogy of sloths in the book about how, funders move too slowly in decision-making and kind of these processes and practices that they create for themselves. And there's lots of ways that they can speed things up. So I think the book for a nonprofit leader is very helpful to get an insider's guide into your donors and what's happening for them and how you can help them to help you, essentially. But also, I think all of the ideas in the book are applicable to the nonprofit leader directly. I talk about, as I mentioned, having a scarcity mentality versus an abundance mentality. I talk about how oftentimes questions get in our way and how by asking the wrong questions, we go down the wrong path. And I think often for both nonprofits and philanthropists, one of those wrong questions that trips us up is asking how before asking what. Yeah. So too often, the how is the tactic and the what is the strategy. And we kind of jump to tactics, right? So like, how should we communicate with our donors? Is it social media? Is it Twitter? Is it email? Mm-hmm. Before asking, like, what are we trying to accomplish by communicating with our donors and who are they? Mm-hmm. And so I think too often that's a problem. And similarly, getting clarity on what are the right questions to ask. And one of the right questions starts with asking why. And again, there's lots of great ideas coming at us from all different directions in the nonprofit sector. Kind of the shiny squirrels that we chase. And often we have to come back to, well, why is that important? Why is that going to help us? And is that going to help us advance our mission, or is it going to take us off course? So those are some of the ideas that I share in the book.
Kris, thank you so much for being on the official Do Good Better podcast. I have not had a delightful conversation like this all week because I've been sort of trapped inside, sort of doing paperwork and things. And this was just the most refreshing end of the week ever. And I appreciate you. So how do people find you? They say, I want to tap Kris's brain because she's a brilliant genius. How do we get a hold of you? How can people reach out and not only get your book, but get your advice and any other things that your wisdom will enhance the nonprofit world? How do we get a hold of you?
Awesome. Thank you. Well, my website is putnam-consulting.com. So that's the best way to reach me. My book is available. The book website is delusionalaltruism.com. And as I mentioned, it's also available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble. So those would be the two best ways to reach me.
Outstanding. And of course, those will all be in the show notes. Kris, thank you so much for being a guest on the official Do Good Better podcast. It has been a pleasure, and I'm so glad that I'm now a super fan of you.
Thank you so much, and I'm a super fan of you too.
Thanks. We'll see you guys next time.